Welcome back. It's been about a month after taking a short break, but I'd like to introduce today's episode with freelance sports designer Dean Davies. We go over how to get clients in such a saturated market, considering exposure or payment, and also best practices for learning and publishing in the industry. He gave me a great insight for anyone interested in or even working in sports design, so stay tuned for this one. It's a good episode. So what sort of things would you be doing as a freelance graphic designer for the people watching who wouldn't necessarily know?
Well, in the sports industry, it tends to be working for clubs mainly, and sports social accounts. I've only been doing that for the past 2 years. I work full time as a web designer, so I kind of balance the two between the working hours. Yeah, I've been quite lucky to pick up a few clients along the way.
Yeah. So is this sort of your full time thing then, or do you do this for a job?
I would call it a part-time job because I work 9 till 5:30 during the week, designing websites for the company based in Brecon. So I started doing this mainly as a hobby, really, and then it just transpired into doing some paid work, and I got regular work from it now.
Yeah, nice. So how did you actually get into design? Because to be honest, it's something that I always wanted to do. When I was younger, I used to play around with Photoshop and stuff.
Well, to be honest, I don't really know. I did web design as a part of my bachelor's degree about 10 years ago now, and obviously web design was a part of that. So I'd obviously used Photoshop to do banners for the websites. Yeah, I mean, I've always done flyers and things like that. Initially, I did business and financing in college, so I wasn't even going into any kind of design or IT area. And I think that it comes from going into web design. I've kind of expanded what other things I can do. And then, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of football edits, I think you would call them, on Twitter, doing the rounds. Mm-hmm. And I think sports design in the UK especially has just transpired from just doing edits to becoming freelancers for football clubs and, sports social channels.
How sort of easy was it for you to actually learn from scratch to do this sort of thing? Was it just playing around on Photoshop? Was it YouTube tutorials?
Yeah, I think obviously you've got to have a good eye for stuff as well. But I'd say it's pretty easy to learn from scratch. I mean, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube that you can follow. I think another good way to learn is, to do collaborations with other designers, so you can learn from how they do things and have regular chats with other designers as well. Get feedback on all your work. I think that's probably the best way to do it, is to get feedback from other designers. I think, they're also doing what you do, and it's important to get their point of view as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned just before then you did web design, you do that, as your 9 to 5. Is, graphic design, this football edit sort of thing, is that something you potentially want to do full time, and is that sort of you more of a passion?
Yeah, I would say it's taken over my initial passion of doing web design. I think it's a lot more creativity when it comes to doing sports design stuff. There's a lot more possible opportunities anyway. I find that web design becomes a bit, it's the same thing over and over, especially when you work in the e-commerce sector. An online shop is an online shop. They all look pretty much the same, just a different skin. But yeah, I think give it a couple of years. It's certainly something I want to look at pursuing more as a full-time job, perhaps working for myself, freelance.
Obviously, I've been following you for a few months now. I think I've seen your designs. They're really good. If you don't mind me saying, they're fantastic. Do you always think you're always sort of learning with these things, and can you always find new tools and skills?
Because I didn't really do design as a degree or in A levels or anything like that. I think there's always going to be something that I'm going to learn, especially because design is always evolving anyway. But when it comes to Photoshop itself, I would say I'm learning new things on a daily basis at the moment, especially during lockdown, watching a lot of tutorials and, just having to play around. I think it is important to take a step back from doing paid work and just to create for yourself. It gives you the opportunity then to explore other avenues.
How would you actually sort of learn if you're a new up and coming designer at the moment? How would you learn Photoshop? Is it strictly just YouTube tutorials you'd recommend?
I would say, yeah. There is a lot on YouTube, especially recently. There's a lot more people doing tutorials. I think if you wanted obviously to go into the sports sector of design, then it's worth following, other designers who've got their own YouTube channel. Yeah, I think tutorials on YouTube, yes,
Yeah,
certainly the way to go.
Working freelance as you do in the market, it must be quite challenging. As a media officer for a football club,
Yeah, it
I
is very
see so many, talented designers out there. It must be quite a saturated market. How can you stand out and,
it
promote
does.
yourself?
Yeah, it is. I think at the moment it is there's a lot of people doing stuff at the moment, but it's that saying, what's that saying? Put out the work that you want to be hired for. I think that's very important. I mean, you see a lot of, designers putting out what you would call football edits. They're not necessarily something that a club would actually put out on their social media or put into print. So I think it's important to have a balance between, doing an edit for your own personal social channel and then putting work out that, you want to be hired for.
Because of all this, sort of saturation in the market and stuff, there's less of an opportunity to sort of take this full time and do that. Is it a sort of lower rate of pay, you think?
In the UK, it's certainly harder to do freelance for football clubs. They tend to take on internally. But a lot of my work has come from, social channels. So I don't know if you know Squawka football.
Yeah.
They've been good to me over the last 18 months. I've picked up quite a lot of work through them and made some good friends. As far as football clubs go, I haven't done any work with any football clubs since Swansea City. It's always been through, sports companies that use social media to have engagement. Recently done work with 11 Sports. So I think that if you didn't pick up work through football clubs itself, the work is out there. You've just got to, keep going and it will come to you eventually.
Is it more of like a contacts game then? People refer you and then, you get hired as a designer for someone else?
Yeah, it certainly gets like that. I think once you get the ball rolling and, you've picked up one or two and they become consistent clients, you do get a lot of referrals from that. And then it's important then to just keep that ball rolling. The initial getting your first one or two clients is a struggle, especially like you said, it's very saturated at the moment. But there's a lot of sport out there, so if you just keep grinding it out, then you will pick up work eventually.
Just there about, your first few bits of work are going to be hard to get. How would you actually, for someone, just starting out, how would you actually promote yourself and actually get those clients? Is it just through social media?
Yeah, I mean, all my work that I've ever picked up has always been through Twitter. I think it's one of the better networking communications for especially sports design. I mean, I've tried LinkedIn. I haven't picked up hardly any work from that. I'd say Twitter is a very good route for pursuing getting clients going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of sports on Twitter. I think it's probably the best place for any sports designer to show off their portfolio because it kind of acts as your portfolio in a way. I think having a website is great, but I think if someone can just click on your profile and scroll through all your work and keeping it consistent, that acts as a portfolio then. And it's so easy to obviously tag media managers in your posts so that they see them, they can pass your name on to the club, and then hopefully that will eventually then pick up work.
Have you dabbled at all in TikTok then? Because I know I've seen a few designers actually, do their design process through TikTok. Is that a platform you've sort of went on?
I'm not on TikTok, no. I have been meaning to join. I'll write that down. I forgot about that one.
To be honest, I've just seen sort of other designers. They do like actually their design process, and I follow like these like marketing people, and they always say TikTok seems to be the up and coming thing. For me at the moment, it just seems to be younger people are on there. So I don't know. I think one that I've seen for yourself just scrolling through is Instagram now. Is Instagram quite a powerful tool to get clients as well?
I mean, I think you're more likely to interact with athletes more than clubs on Instagram. I think they're a bit more active on Instagram than they are on any other social channel. So I think if you use your social media, to target your client in different areas, I think Instagram, I have picked up a few couple of pieces for football players, but it's been more companies and clubs. So I think they both have their pros and both have their cons. I think there's a lot more interaction with Instagram. There's a lot more, not more of an audience to get to. But again, Instagram is it's like a portfolio again, because you click on your profile and there's just a grid of all your images. So keeping it consistent on there as well, keeping it nice to look at, I think is certainly a positive, and will get you clients eventually when they click on your profile.
Yeah, and with the athletes and stuff, obviously the footballers, I see them, I don't know if they have agencies behind them, but the agencies sort of contact you and ask for work for their football, athletes, or is it just the footballers who sort of repost? How does that work?
I mean, they say that if I did a personal post, a lot of my stuff, like my Swan stuff, will get shared because obviously they're local, I'm local as well. Or I just post it, tag them, and I'll get an instant message saying, "This is great. Can you send me the high res for me to post on my social media?" And then they'll tag you in it, and then they'll give you exposure. Obviously, it's not a payment or anything like that, but I think every now and then exposure is also as good as payment. But any work I've done on Instagram, I'd say it's 50-50 paid and 50-50 just for exposure. Yeah, Instagram is a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of copying going on Instagram, and I don't like to bring it up too much, but I think it does seem to be a place where people are going and they just want to become like a sports designer, and they are just copying designs and saying it's inspired by, but there is a difference between being a copycat and saying that you're inspired by someone. I think it is important to know the difference between the two, and that's how I've kind of taken a step back from Instagram recently, because I get a lot of instant messages saying, can you send me this? Can you send me that? I think that's one of the bigger problems with Instagram at the moment.
Yeah, it's probably the thing of, people asking for the Photoshop files and stuff. It kind of feels a bit weird, I guess, if you're the one creating it, and, in some cases you're doing that as your work.
Yeah, it is a bit, one or two messages, it's not too annoying, but I know a lot of designers get it on quite a daily basis, and it's nice that they want to take something from what you've done. But like I said, it's important to know the difference between being a copycat and then being inspired by the design to then and go and put your own stamp on it.
Design must come from inspiration somehow. I'm not saying necessarily by copying someone else, but for yourself, how do you get inspiration?
A lot of my stuff doesn't normally come from sports related things. I mean, I can be, especially during lockdown, I go out on a lot of walks with my two girls, and I just see things. It could be a sign, it could be someone's put a poster up in town, and it could be little elements that you just see when you're out and about. Other than that, if you were looking online, I tend to look a lot on Pinterest. I think that's probably the best place to go for inspiration, because you can build your own boards and categorize them. I mean, it is important just to take new things from other people and put them into how you want to interpret them, instead of directly copy pasting it. It just doesn't look right.
Agreed. So just going back to your point about doing the sort of 50-50 exposure work to actual getting paid for your work, how do you actually decide when it's good to do exposure? Because as a designer, you must get so many people asking, oh, can you just do this for free? You can get all this exposure, but for a fact that they just want free work and it's not going to be great for you. How do you determine when to give your work away, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the exposure work I've done has mainly been for, it might have been a media manager who's been looking after a couple of players, and they've asked for, this player is close to 50,000 followers on Instagram. Are you able to knock up a quick piece? For that, I would probably say, yeah, I'll do that quickly for you. When it comes to these accounts, especially Instagram again, they want to be the next Bleacher Report or, the 433, they want to be the next big account, and they say, do some work for us, and, in return, we'll tag you. That's the sort of work you don't really want to get into, because then you'll just keep going and going and going, and you won't be able to get out of it. For paid work, I'd say, if it's going to take you longer than, say, half hour, 45 minutes, then you should really be charging for it anyway, no matter what.
Do you think maybe designers as a whole are sort of, undervalued a bit, because, there's sort of so many of you, and, media managers, it is a skill at the end of the day, and it's a real valuable skill for people like me who can't do that. Do you think media managers undervalue that a bit?
I think overall, I think it's undervalued and I'd say it's underappreciated as well. I get, you get a lot of people emailing, sending direct messages. Could you quickly knock something up for me? Or, how much do you charge for a logo? And then you give them a price. They say that's extravagant. That's too expensive. I think people people who aren't in the design industry don't really understand how valued it should be. I mean, I think sports design, I think that is becoming a bit more understanding of what is needed and how to value it itself. But in design in general, I think it's still undervalued, and I think it will continue to be undervalued. As well, you get, they got their own make your own logo thing now, and build your own website. I mean, people think they pay prices for Wix, and they'll go somewhere else and pay exactly the same price for a freelance designer.
Yeah, I think it's something sort of I've experienced as well with video, because I do a lot of video stuff and a bit of freelance, and for ages I didn't, I was sort of maybe too nervous to charge, or I felt guilty. How do you get over that hurdle of charging for the work, which is a lot of work you put into something?
Yeah, I think when you do your first couple of commissions, it is difficult to price for yourself because you haven't priced for yourself before. And I mean, you could ask other designers what they're charging, but they're paying for what you put out, so you've got to make sure that you're pricing for yourself and not copying what other people are pricing for. I tend to, you price it up and then you think you've done the job and you think, oh, I could probably charge more for that. And until you ask, actually give the quote for that job, you don't know how much they're willing to pay for it. Obviously, you don't want to go over the top with your pricing, because then that puts you, out the range then. But I think it's important to always revisit it every couple of months, just to make sure you are charging what you should be charging for yourself.
I'm interested to know what when people sort of message you, asking for free work or whatever, is it just like a straight, I do this professionally, or, is there even a response to that? Because I think, personally, I think it's the sort of level of disrespect really when they see the work you're doing.
Yeah, it does. I think some messages, especially when they're short and quite blunt, they can come across as quite annoying. But at the end of the day, they don't know until they ask, do they? So I suppose it goes both ways. They don't want to pay for it, but they don't know if you'll do it for free until they ask. I mean, for me, sometimes it depends on what kind of mood I'm in. If I'm in a really good mood and I've not got a lot on, and I am looking for like a personal project just to keep my creativity going, I might say yes if it's one or two pieces. But yeah, I wouldn't take on a lot of free work if you have got consistent client work.
Yeah, and what do you sort of find the best sort of clients are then? Is it sports teams, or is it even out of sport? Do you do much in that area?
I find at the moment my work is constantly doing sports design, and that's through companies like 11 Sports, like Squawka. I do quite a bit with the FAW, who have also been very good to me. But as far as sports clubs, it's really difficult to get them to notice you at the moment. Obviously, with lockdown and everything that's going on, they've also got their own graphics team as well. So unless there's an agency looking after that sports club, it's quite difficult to get involved with clubs at the moment.
Yeah, do you think it's, the COVID-19, the lockdown and stuff, has that benefited you, or has it gone the other way?
It's hard to tell because I wasn't incredibly busy before lockdown. I took a short break because my full-time job was quite demanding at the time. I'd say it's been about average for me. I mean, I've picked up more work than I did before lockdown, but I've also probably not gained as much as I would have hoped during this time. I suppose that's down to the fact that if you push for your own work, you will probably get some clients in. But at that time, I wasn't actually looking for any work myself. Even during lockdown, I wasn't really, looking for any massive projects. The odd one or two was great. But as it's gone on, I've managed to pick up, a couple of more jobs here and there. And it's all in the sports industry. I don't even look for like commercial or online companies anymore. I tend to just keep my freelance just around sports.
Yeah, and when you're looking for clients or whatever, is it generally you going out and approaching them, or do they approach you?
The only team I've obviously tried to get some work with is obviously Swansea City. Other than that, I've not sent out any proposals during my freelance tenure. I think if you are doing it full time and it is your full time, revenue, I think it is important to put some project proposals together to send to clubs, to send to agencies, just showing what you could offer them. But as for me personally, I've never actually gone out and sent a direct email or asked them to give me some work. It's always been they've come to me, and it's always then gone on to that referral thing that we were talking about before. Once you start getting referrals, you find that you don't necessarily need to push yourself to try and get clients. They tend to come to you.
In terms of the client work as well, when you sort of agree that you want to work together, they give you a project or whatever, do you have to sort of pitch it like you said and do like a rough draft first and then go for the project, or is it you just send them the whole project and that's sort of it?
Yeah, I mean, if it's you get one or two things in a week from a consistent client, they want two graphics, one for different posts. You tend to you come up with an idea, you send it to them, you get their feedback and make any changes and go from there. But normally for me, it's quite refreshing that what I send them, they're happy with, and I don't have to make that many changes, if any.
When I'm sort of, just dabbling in this design thing, it seems like the one-to-one image size is the best sort of size. Do you sort of have to do it in different sizes? And if you're doing it for a client, do you do it in loads of different sizes? And, does that take a lot longer?
I mean, yeah, it's some clients will ask you for specific sizes and they'll want it, to go on Twitter, on Instagram, and in the story. So that's ending up being 3 variations. So if you plan it out properly, it won't take you much longer to adapt them, especially if you use artboards in Photoshop. You can easily move things around. But yeah, I think it's important to know what works best on which platform. My tend to go-to size for especially personal work is the 4:5, normally around 2000 pixels by 2500. It tends to be the best quality that you can upload without it losing any quality. And then obviously you can flip that on the side as well, so it's a 5:4, and that works quite well on Twitter as well. But most clients will tell you, I want it in this size, and then you can work with that then.
Do they also sort of specify a turnaround time with these things? Because I'm just thinking about the last night, the Liverpool one. It's maybe not a good example, but say if they were maybe going to win the league, maybe not, they'd have to have a really short turnaround time for that. Do they sort of give you a few hours, or is it a day? Or
I think when it comes to the game last night, they would have had a lot of pieces prepared ready, because I think they knew that it was coming anyway, whether it was last night or the weekend. I think everyone knew that Liverpool were going to win the title, and there would have been graphics lined up probably for months, especially with there being a break in football. They probably would have started doing stuff like March, April, especially if you're doing it as a personal project as well. You would have started doing it a while back. But as for reactive pieces, if there's just a normal game on and, something important happens during the game that's not, you weren't expecting it to happen, they've probably got a few reactive pieces ready to go. So there's probably designers on standby.
Yeah, and in terms of reactive pieces like that, I'll give another example of, say, there's 2 teams in the title race, it comes down to the last day. Do you have 2 different graphics ready for that? And, do you sort of, if you're a freelance designer, would you charge more for that, or are they just going to pick up one of them and pay you for that one?
If I use my own work, for example, I did some work for the FAW last year when Jess Fishlock won the Women's Champions League with Lyon, I think it was. They wanted to do a piece with all previous Welsh winners of the Champions League. So I did that one in advance in case, obviously, they went on to win it. So they then used it. And then I think about 2-3 weeks later, Tottenham were playing Liverpool, and Ben Davies was playing in the final for Tottenham. And I did a piece ready, and obviously Liverpool won it, so it never got used. But yes, I still invoiced and still got paid for doing the actual work.
Yeah, that's quite good then, really. So in terms of, say obviously this podcast, there's a lot of, younger people trying to get in the industry, trying to, make a living out of this. is how would you sort of recommend to price yourself if you're sort of trying to get in an industry and, you've done a bit of free work and now you're trying to take the steps to make this an actual career?
Yeah, I mean, I probably was undercharging when I first started out, but until you start charging, you're not really going to know what you should be charging. And I think it's important to initially price yourself per hour, because then that gives you at least this is what I charge minimum. So if it takes less than an hour, then you should always charge what your minimum should be. But yeah, I think it is very difficult for the younger generation starting off pricing, because a lot of people are very much underpricing the design market, especially if you're in the like the YouTube thumbnails and YouTube logos. I think that's very much underpriced, and then people see those prices and expect to pay those kind of prices in other design sectors. So I think it's just a trial and error. I would say you charge this for this client and then try it for a different client and see which one works best. I think it's always important to increase your prices, because obviously the cost of living is going up. And yeah, I think it's always important to revisit what you should be charging.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all my questions I've got for you, basically. But I mean, I've got just one more. I might sort of put you on the spot with this one. But after every podcast, I do ask everyone who's been on, just essentially, what is your dream job?
I think working for the Swans would be, a great privilege for me to do that. But it would be nice to work for, UEFA, FIFA, not permanently, like doing freelance for them. But ultimately, my dream job is just to be freelance full time and just to have that escape from working a 9 till 5:30 job and 5 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dream, innit? Listen, Dean, thanks so much for coming on. Really insightful stuff. And, if I ever get a budget to actually do any designing at York, I know who to come to. There you go, Dean Davies. Thank you very much for coming on. A bit of a shorter episode today, but I think you'll all agree a lot to take from it. Dean's handle on Twitter, should I say, is @DeanCDavies. If you want to give him a follow, his designs are absolutely class, which is, why I asked him to come on the podcast. Also, if you haven't given this podcast a review yet or shared it with anyone you know, then that would be equally as amazing, because that helps me reach more people and help more people with these conversations I'm having. This is obviously the first episode in a month, and there is good reason for there not being an episode. It's there's been a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of the press conference brand. I've recently set up a Facebook group, and that has really, really took off, if I'm honest with you. I'm just looking at it now. We're on 1,541 members just as we speak on this podcast, and these are all people who are either sports journalism students, people looking to get into sports media, or people already in sports media. I think there's a lot of football press officers in this group already who are handing out free advice, people asking for feedback and stuff, and just generally networking, which is going to stand you in such greater stead of actually being successful in this industry. So if you want to join this Facebook group, it's completely free. All you have to do is search for The Press Conference. You'll see it's the exact same branding. If you can't find it, just drop us a message and I will send you a link. My handle is @Dan_simmonite, or you can get me on the Press Conference official channels, and I'm pretty sure most of them, or if not all of them, are @PressConfPod. I really want to make this group the hub of everything sports media, whether people come for industry news, which is obviously posted quite regularly in the group, or even the sports media jobs, which I've been posting as well on a bi-weekly basis. There's also the possibility to do live webinars, so learning as well, and obviously live podcasts as well. I've also got a partner in this who's come on board. It's totalfootballanalysis.com, so the possibilities are really endless with this group, and we can shape it any way the members want it to. So if you give it a join, have a look around and just give me some feedback on what you think could work best. I essentially want it to be the sports media community, and I want this podcast to be the sports media podcast. And just to let people know, I do have about 5 or 6 episodes pre-recorded of this podcast, so I do want to make this more of a weekly thing. I think I'll aim for about Monday, Tuesday release on all these, and if you haven't already, you can be the first to listen to these by actually subscribing. It doesn't cost a penny, so I think you can subscribe via Apple Podcasts and then you follow via Spotify. And if you do that, it would absolutely make my day. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.
you.